They say that life is full of ups and downs, but things aren't as black and white as they seem. My great-grandfather and his son are perfect examples of that. My great-grandfather, Walter Cerioli, was born in 1919, and he lived a pretty average life, going to school, graduating, playing baseball, and even working a job at this new company called Grumman. He was the 723rd employee to work for the company. His life seemed to be going smooth until...
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
The attacks on Pearl Harbor changed everything. Shortly after, the United States declared war on Japan, and in turn, Germany declared war on the United States. He would continue to work for Grumman in the war effort, producing planes like the F-6F Hellcat, which became the backbone of the U.S.'s Pacific Navy. He believed that he was safe from the war in Europe, until he wasn't. He would be drafted in 1944, went through basic, and went over to Europe, fortunately after the landings in Normandy.
He was a private like everybody else when they went in. He had no stripes on his arm. And when he got out, stripes are on the other side, but when he got out, he was a staff sergeant.
He fought many battles, but this one, the last one, would be his most memorable. The Battle of the Bulge is considered to be the last offensive of the Nazis, or Jerry's, as my great-grandfather called them, before their total collapse on the Western Front. The plan entailed them trying to recapture the port city of Antwerp through the Ardennes Forest and cut off multiple armies. That way Hitler can make a separate peace with Britain and the US, rather than unconditional surrender, so that they can focus their resources on the Soviets to the east. My great-grandfather fought on Christmas Day and nearly lost his life.
I joked that Christmas morning when we went out. I had so many K-rations in the side of my slicker, like a raincoat, it really was. I had a chest on me like that. I said, boy, ain't no goddamn Jerry gonna shoot me in the chest. That's no lie. What a mistake. They dropped the bomb behind me.
Causing shrapnel to rip through the left side of his body. Following his recovery, he would then marry my great-grandmother, and they had my grandfather, Ronald Cerioli. My grandfather grew up as an average guy like my great-grandfather. He had an infatuation for automobiles, and when things went smoothly, the Vietnam War hit.
At Thanksgiving in 1965, I wind up getting my draft notice, and I'm supposed to report for duty on January 16th of 1966. And that was drafted, so I would have been either in the Army or the Marine Corps. So I was able to quick go down and negotiate with the recruiter, the Navy recruiter, a spot in aviation jet school after I got out of boot camp. So a week before I was supposed to go in the Army, I joined the Navy, took the oath, and went into the military, went into the Navy, went to basic training, boot camp if you will, in Illinois.
He would work on planes in the Navy, eventually working his way up as a flight engineer. And as a result, he was now able to hunt for Soviet subs off the Bermudan coast. Much like my great-grandfather, he would work at Grumman after his tenure in the Navy.
So what's this right here?
Well, after he got out of the war, he went back to Grumman where he started.
Looks good flight. GMC. Looks good flight.
Following the war, my great-grandfather would work on one of the most important American efforts as production manager for the Apollo LEMs, or lunar modules, which would eventually go to the moon. He would even work with luminaries on the project, such as Wernher von Braun. However, he wasn't done yet after Apollo. You ever see that plane that flew around in the first Top Gun movie? Yeah. He would be recruited once again as a production manager on the F-14 Tomcat, America's most popular fighter jet, to complete the father-son duo at Grumman.
The last job that I had working for Grumman was a configuration manager, and my department was responsible to make sure that every aircraft that was delivered to the government was identical. I mean, in every nut, bolt, screw, every piece of hardware, avionics, everything.
We went out to Calverton Memorial Park in Long Island, where he and my great-grandfather's names are immortalized in the stone.
You have to be so careful not to walk behind these things. They'll blow you off the carrier or halfway down the runway. And one time, I made the mistake coming out from under the wing on the P3, which is not like an F-14, and I got hit in the back of the head with the blast and went tumbling far enough down the runway to know better. It's a sign that's dedicated to the men and the women, you know, of Grumman who served in the armed forces, the United States, and in memory of those who made the supreme sacrifice in World War II, 1941 and 1945.
Even though life may throw curveballs, fear of death, and even a few artillery shells, I think it's what we accomplish when the dust clears that makes life worth living. My great-grandfather wrote about his experience in a letter. He ended it with how he was lucky to be alive, and I think that's true for all of us. We often take the things we have for granted, whether it be opportunities or freedom, but when those are taken, we come to appreciate what we have, and living to fight another day is the most important lesson a father can teach his son.